My hands shook as I adjusted the tiny camera hidden in my jacket lapel. 3 years ago, or technically 2 weeks from now in my previous life, I had stood in the east stairwell of Westlake Academy sobbing while the entire student body watched a doctored video of me supposedly making out with Professor Liam. The video that ruined my life. The video that drove me to... No, that wasn't happening this time. Are you sure about this, Mia? Jules whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. We were crammed in the AV room, surrounded by outdated equipment and the unmistakable smell of teenage desperation and energy drinks. Positive. I tapped my earpiece, making sure it was secure. The broadcast override is ready? Jules nodded, shoving her bright purple hair behind her ears as she hunched over her laptop. Yeah, but this is seriously insane. If we get caught, we won't. I'd had 3 years of regret to perfect this plan. 3 years of wishing I could go back and expose the truth. Then somehow, through some cosmic mistake or miracle, I did go back. One moment I was swallowing those pills in my dingy apartment, my reputation and life in tatters. The next, I was waking up in my old dorm room, 17 again, 2 weeks before everything fell apart. I checked my phone, 4:30 p.m., right on schedule. Daniel texted, they're heading to the south building now, Jules said, not looking up from her screen. My stomach tightened at his name. Daniel Carter, my first love. The boy who betrayed me so completely that I never recovered. The boy who was currently telling everyone that I was mentally unstable and cheating on him with our professor. The boy who was actually sleeping with the dean's daughter. Start the recording, I said. I'm going in. Walking through the familiar hallways of Westlake Academy felt like being in a dream. Every face I passed, some sympathetic, others suspicious, had no idea what was coming. In my first life, these same students would be sharing videos of my breakdown, writing awful things about me online, whispering as I passed. Not this time. I kept my head high as I made my way toward the south building. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. For a moment, I considered turning back. Was revenge worth reliving all this pain? Then I remembered Daniel's face when he stood in front of the entire school and said, I didn't want to believe the rumors, but I caught her. I caught Mia cheating. I have proof. I remembered how no one, not a single person, had asked for my side of the story. They're in Professor Kent's old office. Jules's voice came through my earpiece. The dean hasn't used that space since he retired last semester. Got it, I murmured, pretending to adjust my hair while speaking into the tiny microphone. Is the camera working? Crystal clear, Jules confirmed. But Mia, seriously, are you sure Daniel will be there? What if... He'll be there. I knew because in my past life, I'd gotten a mysterious text from Daniel's phone asking me to meet him in that exact office at 4:45. When I arrived, I found Professor Liam instead, confused about why he'd been asked to come there. That's when someone had taken pictures of us, edited them, and created the video that destroyed my reputation. This time, I wouldn't be the one walking into a trap. As I neared the office, I spotted Carrie Williams lurking nearby, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching her phone, waiting to accidentally capture whatever setup they had planned for me. But today she wasn't getting what she expected. Carrie! I called out with fake cheerfulness. She jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Oh, Mia, what are you doing here? Just looking for Daniel. Have you seen him? Her eyes shifted nervously to the office door. No, I haven't. I leaned in close, dropping my voice to a whisper. That's weird because his location sharing shows he's right in there. I pointed to the office. Carrie's face flushed. Maybe it's glitching. Maybe, I smiled brightly. Guess I'll check anyway. Before she could stop me, I walked straight to the office door and threw it open without knocking. And there they were. Daniel had Vanna Reed pressed against the desk, his hands under her shirt, her leg wrapped around his waist. They broke apart with matching expressions of shock. Mia! Daniel shouted, immediately stepping away from Vanna. This isn't what it looks like. I finished for him, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. Even expecting it, seeing them together sent a wave of pain through my chest. Funny, that's exactly what I was going to say 2 weeks from now when you accused me of cheating. Vanna straightened her shirt, her face red but her eyes defiant. You weren't supposed to be here. I know. I was supposed to be meeting Professor Liam right now, right? After getting a text that seemed to be from Daniel? I pulled out my phone, showing them that I hadn't fallen for their trick this time. Except I never got that text because I blocked the spoof number you were planning to use. Daniel's face went from shocked to calculating in an instant. It was the same expression he'd worn when he'd stood in front of everyone and lied about me. You've lost it, Mia, he said, his voice taking on that concerned tone he was so good at faking. I think you should talk to someone about these paranoid delusions. I laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. You always were good at gaslighting, Daniel, but it's a lot harder when there's evidence. I tapped my lapel where the hidden camera was broadcasting everything to Jules. What evidence? Vanna snapped. It's your word against ours, and everyone knows you've been acting crazy lately. Actually, I said, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice, it's your actions against your lies, and right now, the entire school is watching them. When I walked into the cafeteria 10 minutes later, the normally chaotic space was eerily quiet. Every eye turned to me. Every screen in the room, phones, tablets, even the large display monitors that usually showed announcements, was playing the footage of Daniel and Vanna, followed by their attempted denials. Jules had worked her tech magic, overriding the school's broadcast system and streaming everything to the student portal. She'd even included the text messages I'd saved from my past life, screenshots of Daniel plotting with Vanna to frame me for cheating. Daniel and Vanna burst into the cafeteria behind me, their faces twisted with fury. You can't do this, Vanna screamed, lunging toward me only to be held back by her friends. My father will have you expelled. I stood my ground. For what? Exposing the truth? Daniel stepped forward, his handsome face contorted with the anger I'd seen only in private before. You doctored that footage. You're trying to frame us because you're obsessed and can't handle that I was going to break up with you. A hush fell over the crowd. This was the moment. In my past life, everyone had believed Daniel without question. His family's money, his charm, his status as Westlake's golden boy had made him untouchable, and I braced myself for history to repeat itself. Then someone stood up. Zach Torres, a quiet guy from my biochemistry class. That's bullshit, Daniel. The timestamps on those texts match exactly when you told me you were handling the Mia situation. Another voice joined in. And I saw you coming out of that office with Vanna last week, too. Same time, same messed up clothes. More voices, more students standing up. People who had remained silent last time were speaking now. I felt lightheaded with relief. Jules appeared at my side, squeezing my hand in support as Daniel and Vanna realized they were losing control of the narrative. This isn't over, Daniel hissed at me before storming out, Vanna trailing behind him. Maybe not. But for the first time since I'd woken up in the past, I felt like I could breathe. The fallout was swift and merciless. By evening, the hashtag #JusticeForMia was trending on campus social media. The administration called an emergency meeting where the dean, Vanna's father, recused himself due to conflict of interest. Professor Liam, the teacher they'd tried to frame me with, was horrified when he saw what had nearly happened. They could have destroyed my career, he told the disciplinary board, his face pale. As for me, I sat in my dorm room that night, surrounded by messages of support from people who had shunned me in my previous life, feeling strangely hollow. You did it, Jules said, opening a bottle of smuggled champagne. You changed everything. Had I? Daniel and Vanna were facing suspension. The plot to frame me had been exposed. My reputation was intact, but the pain of betrayal still felt fresh. I didn't just do it for revenge, I said quietly. I did it because the last time, I never got to move on. The rumors followed me everywhere. College, jobs, relationships. Everything was poisoned by what happened here. Jules handed me a plastic cup of champagne. And now, I took a sip, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue. Now I get a second chance to find out who I really am without all that baggage. My phone buzzed with another message. This one from Zach, thanking me for being brave enough to stand up to Daniel. I smiled, remembering how in my past life, he'd been one of the few people who had shown me kindness after everything fell apart. Maybe some things were meant to be, just not in the way I'd originally thought. To second chances, I said, raising my cup. Jules clinked hers against mine. And to finally looking forward instead of back. Outside my window, the campus lights twinkled in the darkness. For the first time in 3 years, the future looked bright. Of course, nothing at Westlake Academy stayed peaceful for long. By the following Monday, Daniel had crafted a new narrative. He was the victim of a misunderstanding. He and Vanna had only gotten close because I had been emotionally unavailable and sending mixed signals. Some people, mostly his lacrosse teammates and Vanna's sorority sisters, were already rallying to his side. Unbelievable, Jules muttered as we walked past a group of girls glaring at us. Does he have some kind of mind control powers? I shook my head. Just money and privilege. His family donated the science building, remember? But something had fundamentally shifted in the power dynamic. For every person who still believed Daniel, 3 more believed me. The video evidence was too damning, the text messages too explicit. Mia! I turned to see Zach jogging to catch up with us, his backpack bouncing against his shoulder. Hey, I said, feeling an unexpected flutter in my stomach. In my past life, Zach and I had become friends during my darkest days. He'd been one of the few people who'd reached out after everything happened, who'd sat with me in silence when I couldn't speak through my tears, but we'd lost touch after I dropped out. The Journalism Club is doing a special issue on social media harassment and scapegoating, he said, slightly out of breath. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share your perspective. What you experienced, how it feels to be targeted like that? Jules raised her eyebrows at me. I'll catch you in class, she said, giving me a not-so-subtle thumbs up before walking away. I hesitated. In my past life, I'd been so traumatized that I'd refused to talk about what happened to anyone but my therapist. But now? Actually, I think that's important, I said. When would you want to talk? His face lit up. Really, that's great. How about coffee tomorrow after biochem? Sounds perfect. As he walked away, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu mixed with something entirely new. The timeline had changed. I was changing it. And for the first time, I was curious rather than terrified about where that might lead. You knew, I said to Jules that night as we studied in our dorm room. In my past life, you knew Daniel was cheating, but you didn't tell me. Jules froze, her highlighter hovering over her textbook. We hadn't talked much about my rebirth experience. I think part of her believed me and part thought I was speaking metaphorically about some kind of emotional awakening. What are you talking about? She asked carefully. The night everything fell apart, after the video went viral, you came to my room. You said you should have told me sooner, that you'd seen them together, but Daniel had convinced you I was the one cheating first. I kept my voice neutral, remembering how betrayed I'd felt in that moment. Jules set down her highlighter. Mia, that never happened. Not in this timeline, no. She was quiet for a long moment. I've never seen Daniel and Vanna together before you exposed them, I swear, but what? But I did notice how he'd text on his phone and then suddenly claim he had group projects or family emergencies. And how he'd get weird whenever you wanted to check his phone. She looked down at her hands. I should have said something. I moved to sit beside her on her bed. It's okay. You're saying something now by helping me? She looked up, her eyes glistening. Do you really believe you lived through all this already? That you died and came back? I'd never said the word died out loud, but that's exactly what had happened. I remembered the pills, the spinning room, the darkness. Then waking up here 3 years earlier. I know it sounds insane, I admitted. But how else could I have known exactly where they'd be? Exactly what they were planning? Jules shook her head slowly. I don't know, but I'm glad you did. Me too, I thought. Though sometimes I still wondered why I'd been given this second chance. Was it just to expose Daniel? Or was there something more I was supposed to do with this reset life? Coffee with Zach turned into lunch, which turned into a walk around campus, which turned into sitting on the grass near the lake until the sun began to set. Unlike the strained, grief-tinged friendship we'd formed in my past life, this connection felt easy, natural. Sorry for hijacking your entire day, Zach said as we watched the sky turn pink and orange. I'm not, I replied honestly. This is the most normal I've felt for a long time. He tilted his head, studying me. You know, when you exposed Daniel and Vanna, you looked different. Different how? Like someone who had already survived something terrible and knew they could do it again. He plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. It was inspiring, actually. Made me finally stand up about what I saw. I turned to face him fully. Why didn't you say anything before? His expression clouded. Last semester, I tried to report something I saw, Daniel selling test answers to the freshman baseball players. The administration buried it because his dad threatened to pull funding. After that, he shrugged. I guess I thought speaking up didn't matter. It matters, I said fiercely, thinking of how my silence in my past life had only made things worse. It always matters. Zach nodded slowly. Yeah, I think you're right. He glanced at his watch. I should probably start writing up our interview for the paper. Unless you want to get dinner? The old Mia, the one who'd been so traumatized by betrayal, would have hesitated, pushed him away, protected her heart at all costs. But I wasn't her anymore. I'd literally died and been reborn. If that didn't deserve a fresh approach to life, what did? Dinner sounds great, I said. 3 days later, Daniel cornered me outside the library. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and urgent. I took a step back, keeping space between us. In my past life, I'd been so desperate for his approval, his forgiveness, that I'd have followed him anywhere, believed any lie, not anymore. I don't think we have anything to say to each other, I replied, glancing around to make sure we weren't alone. Several students were nearby, some watching with obvious interest. Look, this has gotten out of hand, Daniel said, running his fingers through his perfectly tousled hair. I made a mistake with Vanna, okay? But what you did, broadcasting it to the whole school, that was messed up, Mia. I stared at him in disbelief. What I did? You were planning to frame me for cheating with a teacher? You were going to destroy my reputation and potentially ruin Professor Liam's career. That wasn't my idea, he hissed. That was all Vanna. She was jealous, and I just went along with it because... He trailed off. Because why, Daniel? He looked down, his posture changing to the contrite, vulnerable stance I'd seen him use countless times to manipulate people. Because I was scared of losing you. I knew if you found out about Vanna, you'd leave me. In my past life, those words might have melted my resolve. I'd been so in love with him, so convinced he was the center of my universe, that I'd have forgiven anything. Now I just felt sad for the girl I had been. You never worried about losing me, I said quietly. You worried about losing control of me. There's a difference. His expression hardened. You think you're so much better than everyone now, don't you? Little Miss Perfect exposing everyone's secrets? No, I said, adjusting my backpack strap. I just finally understand my worth, and it's a lot higher than how you treated me. I turned to walk away, but his next words stopped me cold. This isn't over, Mia. You have no idea what you've started. I faced him again, noticing for the first time the dark circles under his eyes, the frantic energy radiating from him. Actually, I do know. In more ways than you can imagine. And I'm not afraid of you anymore, Daniel. As I walked away, I felt his stare burning into my back. The threat in his voice was clear, but I'd already lived through the worst he could do to me. What more could he possibly take? I was about to find out. The rumors started small at first. Whispers that my evidence had been manipulated. That I'd set Daniel and Vanna up to get back at them for some imagined slight. Nothing substantial enough to counter the video everyone had seen, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. Just ignore it, Jules advised as we sat in the campus coffee shop, pretending not to notice the stares. People will forget about all of this by next week when Braden's party scandal hits. But I knew better. In my past life, the rumors about me had persisted long after I'd left Westlake. They'd followed me to college, poisoned potential friendships before they could begin. It's not that simple, I said, stirring my latte absently. Daniel doesn't let things go. So what are you going to do? I considered the question. In my past life, I'd withdrawn, hid away, eventually transferring to another school where nobody knew me. Or so I thought, until the whispers started there too. Running hadn't worked. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to fight back. That afternoon, I approached the dean of students, not Vanna's father, but his assistant, a woman named Dr. Chen who had a reputation for fairness. I'd like to file a formal harassment complaint, I said, sitting in her office with hands clasped to keep them from shaking, against Daniel Carter and Vanna Reed. Dr. Chen looked at me over her glasses. Based on the incident from last week? Based on that and on their continuing efforts to discredit me and damage my reputation, I explained. And the fact that they were planning to create false evidence of an inappropriate relationship between myself and Professor Liam. I showed her the screenshots I'd saved, text messages from my past life that detailed their plan. Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but I saw her eyes widen slightly as she scrolled through the evidence. This is very serious, Miss Harper. Have you shown these to anyone else? Just the video that everyone saw, not these specific texts. She nodded slowly. I'll need to speak with all parties involved, including Professor Liam. You understand that making false accusations could result in disciplinary action against you? I met her gaze steadily. These aren't false accusations. I'm prepared to stand by everything I've said. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. In my past life, I'd been too ashamed, too beaten down to go through official channels. I'd accepted the narrative that I was somehow at fault. Not this time. The formal investigation was like lancing a wound. Painful, messy, but necessary for healing. Professor Liam confirmed that he'd received a strange text supposedly from the dean, asking him to meet in that office at the exact time Daniel and Vanna had been there. Several students came forward with stories of Daniel's manipulative behavior. Even Vanna's best friend reluctantly admitted that she'd heard them planning to teach Mia a lesson for being too clingy. For his part, Daniel maintained his innocence, casting himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend. His family hired a lawyer who made vague threats about defamation lawsuits. Through it all, I kept my head high, attending classes, working on the journalism club's special issue with Zach, and trying to build the life I should have had before everything went wrong. You're handling this amazingly well, Zach said one evening as we worked late in the newspaper office, putting finishing touches on the article about social media harassment. Most people would have crumbled under this kind of scrutiny. I gave him a small smile. I've had practice? What do you mean? I hesitated. How could I explain that I'd already lived through worse? That in some ways this was easier the second time around because I knew I would survive. Just that I've been through hard things before, I said finally. You learn what you can handle. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. The article's almost done. Want to take a look? The piece was powerful. It didn't just tell my story, but connected it to a broader pattern of behavior at Westlake. Popular students using social media to target others, the administration looking the other way, the culture of silence that protected abusers. This is incredible, I said, genuinely moved. But aren't you worried about backlash? Daniel's family has a lot of influence. Zach shrugged. Some things are worth the risk. Besides, I've got your back, and you've definitely got mine. The warmth in his eyes made something flutter in my chest. Something I hadn't felt since before everything went wrong in my past life. Something like hope. The article was published on a Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, I'd received dozens of messages from current and former students sharing similar experiences. By Thursday, the administration announced a formal review of their harassment policies, and on Friday, 2 days before the disciplinary board was set to make its decision about Daniel and Vanna, someone broke into my dorm room. I returned from class to find my door slightly ajar. Inside, my laptop was open, browser history cleared, and several files missing from my desktop. Most worrying of all, the folder containing all my evidence, the screenshots, the backup of the video, everything was gone. They're trying to discredit you before the hearing, Jules said as we reported the break-in to campus security. They're getting desperate. I should have been terrified. In my past life, this kind of escalation would have sent me spiraling, but instead I felt an odd sense of calm. They don't know I have backups, I said. I'd learned from my mistakes. Everything was saved in multiple places, some not even connected to my accounts. The security officer looked skeptical as he took our statement. You're sure nothing else was taken? No valuables? Just the files, I confirmed. And there were no signs of forced entry, which means whoever did this either had a key or knows how to pick locks. The officer made a note but didn't look particularly concerned. We'll look into it, but without cameras in the hallways, it'll be difficult to identify anyone. Jules fumed as we walked back to our room. Unbelievable. If this was Daniel's room that got broken into, they'd have the FBI here by now. She was right, of course. The double standard was painfully obvious. But I'd anticipated something like this. It doesn't matter, I said. The hearing is Sunday. All we need to do is hold out until then. But as we approached our dorm, I spotted a familiar figure waiting outside. Vanna Reed, alone for once, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Mia, she said when she saw me, I need to talk to you. Alone. Jules moved closer to me protectively. Not happening. Vanna looked around nervously. Please, it's important. It's about Daniel. I studied her face, trying to read her intentions. In my past life, Vanna had been Daniel's willing accomplice, just as eager to see me destroyed. But something seemed different now. 5 minutes, I said to Jules. I'll be fine. Reluctantly, Jules went inside, leaving Vanna and me standing in the hallway. Someone broke into my room today, I said before she could speak. Any idea who that might have been? Vanna's face paled. That's why I'm here. Daniel's out of control. He's not who you think he is. Not who I thought he was either. I almost laughed. I know exactly who Daniel is. I'm the one who exposed him, remember? No, you don't understand. She lowered her voice. This isn't the first time he's done something like this. Before you, there was a girl at his prep school. And before her, someone else. My blood ran cold. What happened to them? The first girl transferred schools. The second. Vanna swallowed hard. She had a breakdown. There were rumors about suicide attempts, but his family covered it up, paid everyone off. I thought about the pills, the despair, the darkness closing in. In my past life, I'd become that girl. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Because he's threatening me now too, Vanna said, her voice breaking. Says if I don't help him fix this situation with you, he'll make sure everyone sees the private pictures I sent him. That my father will lose his job. That no one will believe anything I say. The pieces clicked into place. So the break-in. I didn't know he was going to do that, she insisted, tears forming in her eyes. I swear, but when he told me afterward, sounded so proud of himself, I realized this isn't going to stop. He'll just keep hurting people. I wasn't sure I believed her, but the fear in her eyes seemed genuine. What exactly do you want from me, Vanna? She wiped at her tears. I want to tell the truth at the hearing, all of it, but I'm scared of what he'll do. It was the opening I needed, the one thing that had been missing in my past life. An ally from Daniel's inner circle. Someone else willing to speak up. I'll help you, I said, but only if you tell me everything, no more lies. As Vanna nodded, I felt the timeline shifting again. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about stopping Daniel from hurting anyone else, in this life or any other. The disciplinary hearing was held in a small conference room in the administration building. 6 people sat on the board, 2 professors, 2 administrators, and 2 student representatives. Daniel arrived with his parents and their lawyer. I came with copies of my evidence and a new ally, Vanna. The shock on Daniel's face when he saw us walk in together was almost worth everything I'd been through. What is this? Hissed his father, an older, more polished version of Daniel. What's she doing with you? I kept my expression neutral. She's here to tell the truth. The hearing began formally with statements from all parties. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an unstable, jealous ex-girlfriend. My client acknowledges that his friendship with Miss Reed crossed a line, the lawyer said smoothly. But the response, a public humiliation campaign, hacked broadcasts, stolen private communications, was disproportionate and potentially illegal. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly and directly. I described finding Daniel and Vanna together. I presented the evidence of their plan to frame me with Professor Liam. I detailed the break-in and the ongoing harassment. This isn't about a bad breakup, I concluded. This is about a pattern of manipulation and abuse that the administration has allowed to continue for too long. The board members exchanged glances. I could tell they were uncomfortable with the directness of my accusations. Then Vanna stood up. "Everything Mia said is true," she began, her voice shaking. "Daniel and I were involved for months while he was still dating Mia. The plan to frame her with Professor Liam was my idea, but Daniel improved it. He's the one who arranged for the professor to be there, who planned to take the pictures and edit them." Daniel's face contorted with rage. "You're lying," he snarled. "You're both lying." His lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My client denies these allegations." "I have proof," Vanna continued, pulling out her phone. "Text messages, voice memos where he discusses the plan. And I'm not the only one." She looked directly at Daniel. "I've been in touch with Rebecca from Westridge Prep. She's willing to tell her story, too." The color drained from Daniel's face. His father leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. The head of the disciplinary board cleared her throat. "We'll need to review all this new evidence. In the meantime, I think we should take a brief recess." As everyone filed out of the room, Daniel shouldered past me, his breath hot on my ear. "This isn't over. You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of." I looked him in the eye, remembering the darkness of my past life, the despair that had driven me to those pills. "Actually, I do. And that's why you've already lost." The board's decision came 3 hours later. Daniel was suspended for the remainder of the semester, with strict conditions for his return. Vanna received probation in exchange for her cooperation. The administration acknowledged the need for improved harassment policies and more support for victims. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was more than I'd gotten in my past life. And most importantly, the truth was out. Daniel's reputation, the thing he valued most, was irrevocably damaged. As I left the administration building, the spring air felt cleaner somehow, sweeter. Jules was waiting for me, along with Zach and several other friends I'd made since exposing Daniel. "Well," Jules demanded, "what happened?" I filled them in on the details, watching their expressions shift from concern to relief. "So it's really over," Zach said, his hand finding mine. "You won." I thought about Daniel's final threat, about the long road ahead to truly heal from all that had happened. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm getting there." That night, I stood at my dorm room window, looking out at the campus. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably plotting his next move. Vanna was likely facing backlash from their shared friend group. The ripples of what had happened would continue spreading for a long time. But for the first time since my rebirth, I wasn't focused on the past. I was thinking about the future, a future I'd never gotten to experience before. College graduation, a career, maybe even love that didn't come with betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Zach. "Journalism Club just got funding for a weekly broadcast. Thought you might want to co-host?" I smiled, typing back, "The school channel? Seems fitting. I'm in." Second chances were rare. I didn't know why I'd been given one, but I wasn't going to waste it fighting old battles. It was time to write a new story, one where I wasn't the victim but the hero of my own life. In my past life, I'd let Daniel's lies define me until I couldn't see a way forward. This time, I'd exposed his affair, cleared my name, and maybe even stopped him from hurting someone else. Not a bad start to my second chance. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror, the same face I'd had before, but with eyes that had seen both death and rebirth. "You've got this," I whispered to myself. "This time will be different." 2 weeks later, Daniel was gone from campus, having opted to complete the semester remotely rather than face the daily scrutiny. His parents had made a large donation to the school's anti-bullying initiative, an obvious attempt to salvage their family's reputation that fooled absolutely no one. The school broadcast channel had become my unexpected sanctuary. Twice a week, Zach and I would sit in the small studio, reporting on campus events, discussing social issues, and occasionally interviewing students and faculty. Today's show was focused on mental health resources, something that would have saved me in my past life. 3, 2, 1. The student producer pointed at us, and the red light on the camera blinked on. "Welcome to Westlake Weekly," I said, smiling into the camera. "I'm Mia Harper." "And I'm Zach Torres," Zach added. "Today we're talking about something that affects every single person on campus: mental health." As we moved through the segment, interviewing the school counselor and a psychology professor, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. In my past life, around this time, I had been sitting in my first therapy session, broken and hollow, unable to even explain what had happened without dissolving into tears. "One thing I want to emphasize," I said when we reached the closing segment, "is that asking for help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." After the broadcast ended, Zach squeezed my hand. "That was powerful, Mia, really powerful." I smiled, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through me. We'd been dancing around our feelings for weeks now, neither of us quite ready to label what was developing between us. In my past life, I'd been too damaged by Daniel's betrayal to trust anyone romantically for years. But this Mia, Rebirth Mia, was different. She knew the value of time, of second chances. "Thanks," I said. "Want to grab dinner?" "Actually," Zach said, suddenly looking nervous, "I was thinking maybe we could do something different tonight. The astronomy club is having a stargazing session on the North Field. They've got telescopes set up and everything." "Like a date?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. His cheeks flushed. "Yeah, like a date." Under different stars than the ones I'd known in my past life, I said yes. The stargazing date was magical. Blankets spread on the grass, the sweet shock of seeing Saturn's rings through a telescope. Zach's shoulder pressed against mine as he pointed out constellations. But what I remember most was the conversation that followed. "Can I ask you something?" Zach said as we walked back to the dorms, the campus quiet around us. "Sure." "That day, when you confronted Daniel and Vanna, how did you know they'd be there? How did you know about their plan?" I'd been expecting this question. Jules had asked a version of it. So had the disciplinary board. I'd managed vague answers so far, but with Zach, I suddenly wanted to be honest. Or as honest as I could be without sounding completely insane. "What if I told you I'd already lived through a version of all this?" I said carefully. "That I knew what was going to happen because for me, it already had?" He studied my face in the moonlight. "Like a premonition." "More like a second chance," I said. "In another life, I didn't catch Daniel and Vanna. They framed me with that professor, and everyone believed them. My life fell apart. I expected confusion, maybe concern about my mental state. Instead, Zach nodded slowly. That actually makes a weird kind of sense, he said. Sometimes when you talk about certain things, you have this look in your eyes, like you've seen more than the rest of us. You don't think I'm crazy? He smiled. I think you're extraordinary. And whether it was a premonition, intuition, or something else entirely that helped you expose Daniel, I'm glad it happened. As we reached my dorm, he leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't. Our first kiss was gentle, unhurried, nothing like the desperate, consuming kisses I'd shared with Daniel. This felt like the beginning of something, not a manipulation or a trap. Good night, Mia, he said when we finally broke apart. Good night, I replied, my heart lighter than it had been in either lifetime. But peace never lasts at Westlake Academy. 3 days later, I returned from class to find Jules frantically pacing our room. Have you seen it? She demanded the moment I stepped through the door. Seen what? She thrust her phone at me. On the screen was an anonymous post on the school's unofficial gossip forum. Exclusive. The real Mia Harper story. Receipts incoming. My stomach dropped. What is this? It just went up 20 minutes ago, Jules said. No details yet, but people are already speculating in the comments. I scrolled through the post, dread building with each word. It was vague but threatening, promising to reveal the truth about me. It's Daniel, I said, certain of it. He's trying to retaliate. But what truth could he possibly reveal? In this timeline, I hadn't fallen for his trap. I hadn't had a breakdown or attempted suicide. My record was clean, unless... Jules, I said slowly, Remember when I told you about my other life? The one where all this already happened? She nodded cautiously. Your premonition thing? What if it wasn't just a feeling or a dream? What if I really did live through all this before? What if I died and came back? Jules stared at me, her expression unreadable. Mia, that's impossible, I know. But what if it's not? I sank onto my bed. The night before I woke up here, back at the beginning, I took pills, a lot of pills. I was in a horrible place, Jules. Everything Daniel and Vanna did had destroyed me. I couldn't see any way forward. Jules sat beside me, taking my hand. You're saying you killed yourself? And then woke up here, 3 years in the past? I nodded, the admission both terrifying and freeing. And now, I'm afraid Daniel somehow found out. Maybe he's been digging into my history, my medical records, looking for anything to discredit me with. But that's not possible, Jules insisted. If you died in another timeline or reality or whatever, there wouldn't be any records of it here. She was right, logically. But logic hadn't exactly been governing my life lately. Then what is he planning? I asked, more to myself than to Jules. My phone buzzed with a text from Zach. Just saw that post, you okay? Need backup? As I texted back, Jules was typing furiously on her laptop. I'm trying to track the IP address of whoever posted it, she explained. If it's coming from off campus, that would support your Daniel theory. Another buzz from my phone, this time a notification that the anonymous post had been updated with a link to a video. My hands shook as I clicked on it. The video began playing, showing a dark dorm room, a figure sleeping in the bed. It took me a moment to realize it was me, recorded through my window from outside. What the hell? Jules whispered, looking over my shoulder. The video zoomed in on my face as I tossed and turned, clearly in the grip of a nightmare. Then my own voice, mumbling in my sleep. Not again. I can't go through this again. Not after dying last time. The video ended abruptly, replaced by text. What is Mia Harper hiding? Why is the school's new truth teller talking about dying and coming back? More to come. I felt the blood drain from my face. Someone's been spying on me, recording me in my sleep. This is beyond messed up, Jules said, her voice shaking with anger. We need to report this right now. But I hesitated, my mind racing. If Daniel was behind this, and who else could it be? His goal was clear: make me sound unstable, discredit my testimony against him, suggest I was delusional or mentally ill. In my past life, it had worked. People had been quick to believe I was unstable because it was easier than confronting the truth about Daniel. But this wasn't my past life, and I wasn't the same person. No, I said, my resolve hardening. That's exactly what he wants. To make this into a new controversy, to put me on the defensive. We're not playing his game. Then what do we do? I stood up, a plan forming. We go on the offensive. Tonight's broadcast just got a new topic. 2 hours later, Zach and I sat in the broadcast studio, the red light of the camera glowing. This wasn't our usual scheduled time, but the journalism club advisor had agreed to an emergency broadcast after seeing the video. Good evening, Westlake, I began, looking directly into the camera. This is Mia Harper with a special report. Earlier today, an anonymous video was posted showing me sleeping in my dorm room, recorded without my knowledge or consent through my window. This is not only a violation of privacy, but a criminal act of voyeurism and stalking. Zach took over smoothly. The video attempts to use out-of-context sleep-talking to discredit Mia's testimony in the recent disciplinary hearing involving Daniel Carter and Vanna Reed. This pattern, attempting to paint women as crazy or unstable when they speak out, is unfortunately all too common. I'm not here to defend myself, I continued. I'm here to state unequivocally that we will not tolerate this kind of behavior at Westlake. Privacy violations, stalking, intimidation, these are serious issues that affect real people. I paused, gathering my courage for what came next. Since the anonymous poster seems so interested in what I talk about in my sleep, let me be clear about what I meant. After the trauma of discovering my boyfriend's betrayal and his attempts to destroy my reputation, I had a nightmare where I imagined a worse outcome. One where I didn't catch them in time, where their plan succeeded, where the pain was so overwhelming that I couldn't see a way forward. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either, I continued. Many people have intrusive thoughts after trauma. Many people have nightmares. Using those private moments to try to discredit someone is not just despicable, it shows the desperation of someone who knows they've lost. Zach reached over to squeeze my hand, off camera but reassuring. We've already reported this privacy violation to campus security and local police, but we wanted to address it publicly because silence only protects the perpetrators. If you're watching this and you've ever been victim blamed, disbelieved, or made to feel like you're overreacting, I said, my voice strong and clear, know that you're not alone, and know that speaking your truth, even when others try to distort it, is an act of courage. As we wrapped up the broadcast, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu mixed with something entirely new. In my past life, I'd been silenced, my story twisted until I couldn't recognize myself. This time, I was reclaiming my narrative. The camera light blinked off, and Zach immediately pulled me into a hug. That was incredible, he whispered against my hair. Over his shoulder, I could see our producer giving me a thumbs up, her eyes wide with admiration. My phone was already buzzing with messages of support. Think it worked? I asked. Doesn't matter, Zach said, pulling back to look at me. You told your truth. That's what matters. But it did work. By morning, the anonymous post had been removed, and a campus-wide email announced increased security patrols around dorms. 2 days later, Daniel's social media accounts went dark, and rumor had it his parents had sent him to a wellness retreat in Switzerland. Vanna approached me after class, her usual entourage noticeably absent. I think you should know, she said quietly. Daniel's parents are withdrawing him from Westlake permanently. After that video thing backfired, they decided a fresh start would be best. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. How do you know this? His mother called my father, she admitted. They wanted to make sure I wouldn't face any additional consequences for coming forward. She gave a bitter laugh, as if they're still in control of what happens to me. As she walked away, I thought about how different things were from my past life. Daniel was gone. Vanna was transformed. And I was alive. Truly alive in a way I hadn't been even before everything went wrong the first time. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I paused at the window, making sure the curtains were tightly closed. The reflection in the glass showed a girl who looked both familiar and strange. The same face I'd always had, but with eyes that had seen death and rebirth. You did it, I whispered to my reflection. You changed everything. And for the first time since waking up in this second life, I slept without nightmares. The rest of the semester passed in a blur of classes, broadcasts, and quiet evenings with Zach. Without the shadow of Daniel hanging over me, I discovered parts of myself I'd never had the chance to explore in my past life: a talent for public speaking, a passion for investigative journalism, a capacity for joy I'd forgotten was possible. Jules teased me mercilessly about my disgustingly cute relationship with Zach, but I could see the relief in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. In my past life, she'd watched helplessly as I spiraled into depression and isolation. This time, she was watching me bloom. So, she said one evening as we studied for finals, have you figured it out yet? Figured what out? Why you came back? Why you got a second chance? I set down my textbook, considering the question. It was something I'd thought about often in the early days after my rebirth, but less frequently as my new life had taken shape. I used to think it was just to expose Daniel, I admitted, to get justice and protect my reputation. But now, I think maybe it was simpler than that. Oh, I think I came back to learn how to live again, I said slowly. In my past life, even before Daniel, I was always waiting for someone else to validate me, to tell me I was good enough. I let other people define my worth. Jules nodded, her expression thoughtful. And now? Now I know my value isn't tied to what anyone else thinks of me. Not Daniel, not Vanna, not even Zach. I smiled ruefully. It took literally dying and coming back to figure that out, but I got there eventually. Jules laughed. You always did have to learn things the hard way. Later that night, I stood on the roof of our dorm building with Zach, watching the stars. Final exams were over, summer stretched before us, and for the first time in either of my lives, I was looking forward to the future without fear. Any regrets? Zach asked, his arm warm around my shoulders. I thought about my past life, the pain, the isolation, the darkness that had eventually consumed me. I thought about the pills, the moment of desperate surrender. I thought about waking up here, being given a second chance I never expected and wasn't sure I deserved. No, I said finally. No regrets, just gratitude. He kissed the top of my head. For what it's worth, I'm grateful too. I can't imagine this place without you. As we looked out over the campus, I thought about the strange, impossible journey that had brought me here. In my past life, I'd let Daniel's lie, that I was cheating, destroy me. I'd believed I was the one at fault, the one who needed to be punished. This time, I'd proven his affair live on the school channel, reclaimed my story, and found a way forward that I never could have imagined. Rebirth, it turned out, wasn't just about coming back. It was about becoming someone new, someone stronger, braver, and more whole than I'd ever been before. Hey, Zach said, interrupting my thoughts. Where'd you go just now? I smiled, leaning into his warmth. Nowhere, I'm right here, exactly where I'm supposed to be. And for the first time in either of my lives, I truly believed it.